If I can, let me give you a little bit of history on your national champions, the Georgia Bulldogs. So you may know that they've won 2 national titles. I would be sure that you've known that, actually. And then you may also know that Jalen Carter was recently arrested for drag racing, which I thought got a little bit old when I was like 18. But anyway, Jalen Carter, with everything on the line, actually like 16, became at least the third member of Georgia's football 2022 national championship team to be charged with reckless driving. A fourth was charged with DUI, and a fifth was alleged to have gone 34 miles over the speed limit when he was arrested. In total, 9 Georgia players have been arrested in the last 13 and a half months. So today's tough question is, I don't even think it's if or does Georgia have a discipline problem, but how bad is their discipline problem? You phrase it however you would like, Caleb, but they've got a discipline problem.
They've got a huge one, and we know the Jalen Carter drag racing event is connected to, unfortunately, a fatality. I believe of another Georgia football player, right?
Yes. So police charged Carter, this is Wednesday, for reckless driving and for drag racing January the 15th with UGA recruiting staffer Chandler LaCroix. So you've got more than one that are involved, and I'll continue to get the rest of them. From downtown Athens at about 2:30 a.m. When she crashed a Ford Expedition being rented by UGA Athletics on Barnett Shoals Road. Police say she was going 104 miles an hour. She and offensive lineman Devin Wilcott died. Her blood alcohol limit was 197.197, which is more than twice the legal limit. So first, prayers to those 2 families. I can't possibly even imagine. But when you have 3 people that are within your football program, actually it would be 4, you have to say this is a systemic problem. You have a team, not literally a full team of 85 players, but you have a team of people, Caleb, that are going out and hitting the clubs and getting hammered, and then they think it's a good idea to go drag racing after that. That is a lot of bad, stupid decisions made all at once. I don't have sympathy for anybody that gets a DUI that results in somebody's death, but it's one thing to say, hey, I had too much, I was just trying to get home. It's another thing to say I'm going to go over 100 miles an hour and race somebody. To me, those are 2 very different things. Both I hold in high disdain, but those are both troublesome. And that's a group of people. That's not one person who went out on his own. Caleb, I think they got big time issues. Big time issues.
I do. I think the bigger part of the issue is that Kirby Smart is pretending they don't have issues. And I think that, Dave, I know you covered Tennessee late 90s, early 2000s. Look, the undoing of Tennessee football, there were a lot of things that caused it, but they had a lot of people getting in trouble. And
it was called do you remember the Fulmer Cup?
Yeah, but that's funny because that was created by a Florida fan the same year Urban Meyer was hired in Florida. And so we know.
But it was still kind of appropriate because Tennessee was having so many people get in trouble.
Yeah, they had like 11 arrests, like one all season.
Yeah, so it was embarrassing, but it was also a sign of the program was losing some of its discipline. If you lose discipline off the field, you're going to eventually lose discipline on the field.
And that's also going to affect recruiting. You and I talked about this 2 weeks ago, how Colorado in the 80s and 90s had such a good football program because players who would have gone to USC, their parents wanted them out of Compton, and their parents wanted them out of Southern California. That happened all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you start getting these issues, parents of certain players who might have issues are going to try to steer them. They're not going to want them in that environment on those teams when it comes to recruiting, and they're going to steer them away. I think that's absolutely what happened to Tennessee. Right after that 2004 wave of arrests in 2005, their 2006 recruiting class was awful. I mean, god awful. And I think that there was a connection there. And not talking about it only makes it worse. Just to give you a point on this, Dave, you know I'm a Grizzly fan, and for the past 2 months, I've been telling everybody John Morant is moving stupid. He's acting dumb. It's going to cost him. And I'm sure you heard about what he did this past
Yes.
weekend. And it's not stopping at 2 games, by the way. He might get 50 games because if he had the gun in Denver, that means he took a gun on the team plane, and guns are banned from team facilities in the NBA. So he's in way more trouble than just this 2-game suspension right now. And I kept saying it, and everybody was just laughing like, oh, we love his brashness, yada, yada, yada. And look at where he is now. And the Grizzlies season is probably done because of it. And it's a problem with Georgia. By the way, Tennessee uniquely, we can talk about this openly. Tennessee's uniquely connected to this with this experience because they had plenty of traffic legal incidents that were really serious involving former players. I mean, I can name 3, and I'm not going to right off the bat, that were involved in, that played from about 97 to 2001 that were involved in traffic fatalities at some point.
Here's the thing that I want people to realize is with this NIL money, it's very possible to just go buy a $800-900 Beretta with basically you're just spending money. Whereas coming across a gun, probably for a guy who's struggling to get through college and isn't getting a lot of handouts, which the big players always were, but it's a lot easier to go buy a gun. And at that age, unless you've been raised with guns, and I have nothing against guns, I don't want to get to Second Amendment debate, but it's a lot easier to go buy those fast cars and go buy those nice guns. And it's a status symbol with a lot of people. So this is going to be something that I think college football is going to have to deal with moving forward. It's not like you can go get a gun, and Tyler Smith had a gun that wasn't registered and the serial number was scratched off. He probably got that on the black market, you would think. And it was probably a little bit cheaper. There's not going to be any financial hindrance for any player with some NIL cash to be able to go and get that type of gun. But here's the other thing that's more detailed. I always felt like since the day that Nick Saban kicked off a linebacker named Jimmy John, I think was his name. It was his first year at Alabama, and he was slinging cocaine in the athletic department parking lot, which is frowned upon. So I believe firmly that he set the standard at that point, Caleb, that you aren't going to be able to do really stupid things. And this is a really stupid thing. But I believe that when you played for Alabama, you knew it was going to be tough, but there was some virtue involved and that he cared for you. Talking to somebody last week before all of this came out, there was a situation in which this person knows recruiting really well and knows inner workings of the programs of Georgia and Tennessee, for instance. And he said there's a more wholesome feel around Tennessee. And this person didn't have any allegiances to either. It is a business in Athens. It is a business in which they want to churn out championships and top NFL prospects. And I've got no problem with that. And some guys are going to be just fine with that because they're all business when they're 18. But we're still talking about young men that could use some guidance. And I'm going to be really frank with you. I think that this, if Kirby Smart doesn't address it, could be a serious, serious issue. Now, if he keeps winning, nobody cares. But at some point, these issues continue to mount up. And Caleb, that to me, if I'm a Georgia fan right now, is deeply concerning.
Yes, I agree. Part of the Nick Saban thing, though, I got to be honest with you, that was to give himself credibility for future situations. I mean, there was the player, I forget his name, the defensive lineman that got kicked out of Georgia for a serious sexual assault incident, I think in like 2014 or 2015. And then he took him on, and I mean, he did not like Paul Feinbaum questioning him about that at all. And he got really upset about the matter. And
players, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but let me just ask you this. Who do you I mean, they're not the exact same person, even though they look like it at times. But let me ask you this. If it's your kid, who are you sending them to? Nick Saban or Kirby Smart? And this isn't just because of these latest incidents, but Nick Saban has a long record of not having a rash of incidents like this. And there were some outtakes of Kirby Smart around the national championship game that I thought were a little abrasive. And a little that, having an 18-year-old son, and maybe I'm soft, guys. If I'm soft, call me out on the message board. And I'm like, I would rather have some, I'm sure Josh Heupel curses. Sure, all that happens. I'm sure players, coaches curse and all that. But there were times I saw some things that Kirby Smart, it felt a little too NFL-like.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me that straight up, yeah, I'd rather Nick Saban. I mean, all day, every day. You're right. Nick Saban there's more of a body of work there over the years, even though I think in many ways, to a degree, Nick Saban's a bit of a fraud in terms of his pretend character. I'm sorry, his sanctimoniousness just annoys me to no end.
But at least he pretends. I don't feel like Kirby Smart even pretends.
No, he doesn't, and it's. Look, we're going to have to see where this goes going forward. I mean, that it gets harder and harder the more successful your programs get. And you're right, with NIL money, it's only going to get worse. So that may be the telling story of Nick Saban, to be able to have this success over the course of 15 years. And you're right, have a couple incidences, but not things get out of hand. Kirby Smart's just won 2 national titles. We don't know how much longer this is going to go, but he's at his peak right now. And it shows how hard it is to maintain that peak. I mean, some coaches, I'm not putting Kirby Smart in the Urban Meyer category yet, where my player just tried to blind somebody on the field, and I'm only going to suspend him for a half because middle fingers to everybody in the SEC. And he hasn't gone to that level yet.
Elias says, I'm more concerned with my kids' emotional and personal development so they can be happy and well-adjusted adult than anything else. I agree. And I think Nick Saban does care about that. Now, is he a little sanctimonious? Yes. Caleb, I'm not arguing that point at all, but I think he cares more than right now what I've seen Kirby Smart. Smoky Mountain Red says Kirby on a fast track to a hot seat once they go 2 or 3 years without a natty. If this off-field stuff continues, you are right. And let me tell you exactly how I know you're right. Because when Tennessee lost the SEC championship game in 2001, there were already some people that were upset about the off-field incidents. Now, if you win that game and you go play for a national title against Miami, one of the best teams in my lifetime.
The most talented team ever.
Yeah. So if you lose that game, you still played for your second national title in 3 years. Okay. So you can beat off the Wolves pretty easily that are upset about discipline. But when they lost that, the Wolves had a little bit more power. And they got a little bit more power in 2005 when things didn't go well. And they had all the power they needed in 2008. So that whole thing started. And I don't want to compare apples to apples because it's not. Kirby Smart has already had more success, and I think is a better coach than Philip Fulmer. But there's the tie there where you give a guy a little bit longer because he actually played for that school, as Philip Fulmer had. But at some point, the championships are not going to look nearly as good. And I don't want this to sound harsh, but they're not going to look nearly as good if you have people that are continuing to suffer irreparable harm, such as death, around your program. That's going to be tough for a lot of people to swallow if this happens on somewhat of a regular basis, Caleb. I mean, he has to address this. And the problem is, once it starts to slip out of your control, it's really hard to get back. It's easy for a coach to go from being a disciplinarian to, hey, I was a little too tough on these guys, I'm going to lighten up, as opposed to being a player's coach and then tighten up. It's hard to go the other way.
And here's the other point. With NIL money, you talk about how it's opening the door for players to be able to afford to do crazy things. Well, depending on where you are on the NIL level, and you and I know this, Georgia is way behind the curve on NIL. They're not where they need to be on NIL. They're not on Tennessee's level. They're not on Alabama's level or Texas A&M's level or Texas's level or Miami's level. I think they're closer to Florida's level, which we know Florida has no idea what they're doing with NIL. With the new age of NIL, a school like Georgia that's not there has to be a little more they can't afford to be as selective recruiting as they used to be. What really did Fulmer in was the emergence of Georgia under Mark Richt and the emergence of some other SEC programs in the early 2000s. he wasn't able to be as selective on the recruiting trail because he had more competition to recruit the best players. So he had to get a little more desperate to just bring in the best players he could possibly bring in, threw aside some background checks, should we say. Kirby Smart's having to probably do that a little more of that too. He could have been in a position where he wouldn't have to do that because, as you and I have talked about, Georgia is a top 3 easiest job in America. But because they're behind the curve on NIL, look, I don't think you're that far around the corner from Tennessee and Alabama marching into the state and getting and competing on Georgia's level with the best players in that state.